I learned my husband had checked out of our marriage because a nurse asked me if I wanted the TV turned off. I was in a trauma ward in Flagstaff, Arizona, flat on my back with my shoulder freshly rebuilt using screws and a metal plate, when she tilted the screen toward me and said, "Your husband was just live on social media. Should I mute it?" I didn't understand what she meant at first. I thought maybe she was confused, or talking about someone else. Then I saw his face on the screen. He was standing under string lights at a backyard party, drink in hand, laughing like nothing in the world had gone wrong. His arm was wrapped around a woman I recognized instantly, his ex. The same woman he'd sworn meant nothing. The live caption floating across the bottom of the screen made my stomach drop. Finally breathing again. Free from the chaos. No more drama. I was still wearing a hospital bracelet. My arm was strapped to my chest. I hadn't even been cleared to sit up on my own. I asked the nurse to turn the TV off. My voice sounded calm, which surprised me because inside my head everything was screaming. Married for 2 years. Together for 4. And he was broadcasting his freedom while I was counting seconds between pain medication doses. I didn't cry. Not then. Shock does funny things. It makes you quiet. It makes you observant. By sunrise, my phone looked like it was possessed. Missed calls. Texts stacking so fast I couldn't open them. What stood out wasn't his name, it was his mother's. Message after message telling me not to overreact, saying he was just blowing off steam, reminding me that marriage takes work. I set the phone face down and stared at the window instead, watching snow slide off the pine trees outside the hospital. Before I tell you what happened after, support the channel by subscribing and dropping a comment about where you're listening from. It helps voices like mine reach further than silence ever could. My husband, Evan, and I met in Portland years ago when I was working for a nonprofit focused on restoring historic neighborhoods. He came in as a volunteer consultant, full of charm and big ideas, always talking about vision and potential. He made everything sound temporary. Money problems, job gaps, responsibility. I thought he was ambitious. What I didn't see was how comfortable he was letting someone else carry the weight. The truth is, my name ended up on everything. Lease, utilities, insurance. Just until things stabilize, he'd said. Things never stabilized. Jobs came and went. Contributions were occasional. Excuses were constant. And I kept telling myself, love meant patience. The accident happened on a mountain road outside town. A delivery van crossed the center line, and the impact spun my car into a guardrail. I woke up hours later with my shoulder destroyed and a surgeon explaining what hardware they'd installed to put me back together. Evan showed up once, stayed long enough to say hospitals freaked him out, said he needed space to process. Apparently, processing meant parties, and captions, and rewriting me as the problem. Lying there, listening to the machines hum, I remembered something that would change everything. Our apartment wasn't ours. It was mine. I stayed quiet for 2 days after that. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I finally understood that reacting would only give him exactly what he wanted. Attention. Drama. A villain he could point to while playing the misunderstood hero. So instead I watched. I read every message without answering a single one, and the pattern became obvious fast. Evan's texts followed a predictable rhythm. First came confusion, what's wrong? Why aren't you responding? Then irritation, you're being dramatic. This is exactly what I'm talking about. After that, panic, please call me. Let's talk. This got blown way out of proportion. And finally, desperation, I love you. You're my wife. Don't do this. I didn't know it yet, but those messages would become evidence. While Evan spiraled through his emotional playlist, I started thinking clearly for the first time in years. Lying in that hospital bed with nothing but time and painkillers forces a certain kind of honesty. I started replaying our entire relationship, not the highlight reel, but the parts I'd always brushed past. The unpaid bills, the rent notices I hid, The times I picked up extra consulting work while he talked about networking opportunities. The way his problems always somehow became my responsibility to fix. My friend Maya flew in the day after I was transferred out of the trauma ward. She took one look at my face and didn't ask what happened. She just said, "Tell me when you're ready." Maya had known me long before Evan. She remembered who I was before I started shrinking my expectations to match someone else's comfort level. When I finally showed her the live clip and the caption, she didn't gasp. She didn't offer excuses. She just nodded slowly and said, "Okay, what's the plan?" That question landed differently than sympathy ever had. We went over the practical stuff first. Lease, utilities, insurance. All in my name. Evan had always said it was temporary. Maya raised an eyebrow and said, "Temporary shouldn't last 4 years." She helped me make a list while I dictated from the bed. Who to call, what documents I needed, deadlines. I didn't realize how much control I'd been surrendering until I started taking it back in small, methodical steps. I was discharged a week later and moved straight into Maya's guest room. Evan didn't know. I let him believe I was still in the apartment, recovering quietly because I needed time. Time to plan. Time to heal enough to stand without swaying. Time to decide how much kindness he actually deserved. He showed up at the apartment twice while I was gone. I found out later through the building manager, who mentioned it casually when I called to ask about changing the locks. Apparently Evan had been confused about why his key suddenly didn't work. Confused enough to raise his voice. Not confused enough to admit he hadn't paid rent in months. That was when I made the first call that actually mattered. I contacted the property management office and explained the situation calmly. Marriage, medical emergency, estranged spouse, sole leaseholder. I didn't raise my voice or overshare. I just stated facts. The woman on the other end of the line went quiet for a moment, then said, "We'll support whatever you need to do." That sentence felt like oxygen. The next calls went out fast. My brother, my cousin, a friend who worked in logistics. I didn't explain everything. I didn't need to. I just said I needed help executing a clean exit, and they didn't ask questions. Evan, meanwhile, was still posting. Nothing directly about me this time. Just carefully curated freedom. Smiling photos. Vague captions about fresh starts and cutting out negativity. People congratulating him. People who knew I'd almost died and said nothing. That hurt more than I expected. But it also clarified something important. If he could rewrite the story publicly, I could rewrite my life privately. And that was when Phase 1 stopped being an idea and became a countdown. Phase 1 happened on a Tuesday, because Tuesdays were the day Evan always assumed nothing important ever happened. I was still moving carefully, my shoulders stiff and aching despite the physical therapy exercises I'd started at Maya's place. But I could sit upright without help now. That was enough. I didn't need strength. I needed coordination. My brother Aaron showed up mid-morning with 2 coworkers from his warehouse job. Guys who understood efficiency and didn't ask unnecessary questions. They treated it like a straightforward job, in, out, done. The apartment felt different the moment I stepped inside. Quieter, like it had been holding its breath. Evan hadn't been there in days, but traces of him were everywhere. Half-finished projects, clutter he promised he'd get to later, electronics humming softly like they were more important than the space they occupied. I stood there, one hand braced against the counter, and felt something unexpected. Relief. We started with his things. Not ours. Not shared. His. Clothes from drawers he never organized. Boxes of equipment he'd sworn would pay off someday. Shelves of hobby gear that cost more than his contribution to rent that year. The guys worked quickly, methodically, no commentary. Every item went into heavy-duty bags, and then straight out the door. It took hours. Longer than I expected. Mostly because the deeper we went, the clearer the pattern became. Unopened mail. Past due notices. Credit card statements addressed to him, but quietly paid off by me. I found receipts tucked into odd places. purchases I never knew about, money I'd assumed was going towards something responsible. Each discovery felt like another small click of a lock finally turning open. I didn't destroy anything. I didn't damage or break a single item. Everything was handled carefully, boxed and documented. That mattered. By the end, the apartment looked lighter, like it could finally breathe. The last thing to go was a stack of boxes labeled important. Documents, personal records, a few old family photos. I set those aside and handed them to the building manager with a simple explanation. He nodded, didn't argue, and locked them in his office. I noticed he didn't ask where Evan would be staying. By the time we finished, my shoulder was throbbing, my energy was gone, and the apartment no longer felt like a place I'd ever shared my life with someone. It felt like a blank page. That afternoon, Evan started calling. At first it was confusion. Did you move something? My key isn't working. Then panic. Why is the apartment empty? Where's my stuff? Then anger. You can't do this. That's my property. The messages came fast, overlapping, his voice notes swinging from rage to pleading within minutes. I didn't respond. Instead, I made another call. The one I'd been putting off because part of me still hoped I wouldn't need it. The job Evan was supposed to start the following week? The one he'd bragged about online? The one he'd told everyone was proof that I'd been holding him back? That opportunity existed because of me. I didn't lie. I didn't exaggerate. I simply shared publicly available information and direct screenshots, his posts, his timeline, his financial instability, and the fact that he'd been publicly mocking his hospitalized spouse. Then I let professionals decide what to do with that information. By evening, Evan's messages changed tone completely. Please, I was drunk. She doesn't mean anything. I was stressed. You're my wife. Then his mother started calling again. And this time, I knew exactly what I was going to say when I finally picked up. I answered his mother's call on the fourth ring, mostly because I was tired of the phone lighting up like an alarm I couldn't shut off. Her voice cracked the second she realized I'd picked up. She didn't start with anger this time. She started with tears. She said Evan was inconsolable, that he hadn't slept, that he was terrified he'd ruined his marriage. She said everyone makes mistakes and that I shouldn't throw everything away over something said in a moment of stress. I let her talk. I didn't interrupt. I just listened because for the first time, I wasn't responsible for managing anyone's emotions. When she finally paused, I asked her a simple question. When was the last time Evan paid rent? The silence on the other end of the line was so long I thought the call had dropped. Then she said he'd told her we had an arrangement, that I handled household expenses and he covered other things. I asked what other things. More silence. I could almost hear her trying to piece together a version of her son that matched what I was saying. So I told her, calmly, methodically. I told her how much rent actually cost, how often he contributed, how many notices I'd intercepted and paid. I told her about the medical bills I was juggling now on top of everything else. I told her about the times I'd worked late into the night while he talked about his next big break. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I just laid out numbers and dates. She tried to defend him at first. Said he'd told her I'd lost my job once and he'd been supporting me. That one almost made me laugh, but I didn't. Instead, I told her I'd held the same position for 6 years and had been promoted twice. I told her I'd email her proof, bank statements, lease documents, payment histories. She said she didn't need to see them. I sent them anyway. The call ended quietly. No threats, no accusations, just a stunned, I need to talk to my son. She didn't call back after that. Evan did, dozens of times. Texts turned into long emails, paragraphs of reflection and regret, promises to change, vows to contribute, sudden declarations of personal growth. He wrote like someone who'd just discovered accountability existed and desperately wanted credit for acknowledging it. He said the party meant nothing, that the post was a joke, that he was scared after the accident and didn't know how to handle it, that he was ready to be a real partner now. It was amazing how clear his priorities became once everything he relied on disappeared. That night, a message came through from someone I didn't expect, his former roommate from college. We hadn't spoken in years. He said Evan had shown up on his couch, crying, talking about how he was going to win me back. He wanted to warn me because Evan was talking about a gesture big enough to fix everything. I thanked him and asked him to let me know if anything escalated. He agreed, then added, almost as an afterthought, that Evan still owed him money. I slept better that night than I had in months. The next morning, my phone buzzed with an email from Evan's mother. It was long, emotional, messy. It moved through denial, anger, bargaining, and finally landed somewhere that surprised me. She apologized. Not a vague one, a real one. She admitted she'd believed the version of events Evan fed her. She admitted she'd enabled him without realizing it. Then, she told me something that made my stomach drop. Evan had been telling his family for years that he was financially supporting me, that I was unstable, that the apartment was technically his, that the car I'd totaled in the accident belonged to him, and he generously let me use it. He'd been borrowing money from them under that narrative, claiming he was rescuing me from my own irresponsibility. The lies were so layered, so detailed, it was almost impressive in a horrifying way. She ended the email by saying she wouldn't be helping him anymore. And as I read those words, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a delivery notification. And I had a very bad feeling about what was waiting downstairs. Maya went down to the lobby because I still wasn't cleared for stairs, and when she came back up, she was holding a large plastic bin like it might explode if she set it down too fast. I knew before she said anything. The smell hit first. Earthy. Damp. Rotting. She placed it carefully on the kitchen floor and just stared at me. On top of the bin was a folded piece of notebook paper, my name written in Evan's familiar, looping handwriting. My stomach twisted as I opened it. It was a speech. Of course it was. About growth. About breaking down to rebuild. About how relationships, like compost, need time and patience to transform into something better. He wrote that he was decomposing his old self to become the man I deserved. He asked me to give us another chance to grow together. Inside the bin was actual compost. Dirt, worms, kitchen scraps. Mixed into it were objects I recognized immediately. Small items he thought carried meaning. A bracelet I'd given him years ago. A cracked mug from our first apartment. And buried, near the bottom, wrapped in tissue that had already soaked through, was a small velvet ring box. I didn't touch it. Maya did, lifting it out with 2 fingers like evidence. Inside was a cheap ring. Fake stone. Gold-colored metal already tarnishing. When she turned it over, I saw the engraving inside. A date I knew very well. It wasn't even ours. I laughed so hard my ribs protested. Tears streamed down my face, but not from sadness. From disbelief. From the sheer audacity of it. Evan really thought a recycled metaphor, a compost bin, and a ring he clearly hadn't bought for me would undo everything. Maya snapped a photo before I could stop her, me sitting there, arm in a sling, staring at a bucket of dirt like it had personally offended me. She posted it to her private social media with a caption about delusion and worms. She didn't tag him. It didn't matter. The internet has a way of finding its way back to the source. I sent Evan one text. Just one. This is exactly where our relationship belongs. Then Maya carried the bin back downstairs and dumped it into the building's trash chute. She sent him the video. I blocked his number immediately afterward. That evening, Evan's mother called again. One call this time. Calm. Controlled. She told me she'd confronted him with the documents I sent. That he'd admitted to lying. That the money she'd given him over the years, tens of thousands, had never gone where he said it did. She said she loved her son, but she wasn't protecting him anymore. Not from me. Not from consequences. I hung up feeling strangely lighter. The next day, I found out the job offer had been officially withdrawn. By then, Evan had moved past texts and emails and started showing up places. Once at the apartment building, once at Maya's lobby, yelling that he just wanted to talk. Security handled it. The police were called one night when he wouldn't leave. He vanished before they arrived. Then came the voicemails. Crying, bargaining, accusations. One message ended with, "I don't know what I'll do if you don't call me back." That one scared me enough to request a wellness check. The officer later told me Evan was fine, just emotional and angry. His former roommate messaged me again that night. Evan had been kicked out for stealing cash. The pattern didn't stop just because I wasn't there to absorb it anymore. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 days later, someone sent me a link. Evan had started a fundraiser. He titled it "Starting Over After Betrayal." In it, Evan painted himself as the victim of a cruel, vindictive wife who had thrown away his belongings, ruined his career, and left him homeless over a simple misunderstanding. He claimed I'd destroyed family heirlooms, that I'd stolen money from him, that I'd lost control after a minor argument. The goal was $5,000. The photos showed him looking exhausted and sat on a couch I recognized immediately. Not his. The fundraiser didn't last long. Within hours, it was reported for fraud by half a dozen people I knew. Friends commented with facts, screenshots, timelines. Someone linked to posts he didn't realize were public. The page disappeared before nightfall. I didn't celebrate. I just felt tired. That exhaustion turned into something else when he showed up at my old apartment building the next afternoon. Neighbors told me later he was yelling, demanding to be let inside, accusing me of lying. The police were called. Evan tried to convince them he lived there. The property manager corrected him. He couldn't produce ID or mail with the address. When they ran his name, something unexpected happened. There was a warrant. Unpaid traffic tickets. Hundreds of dollars worth. Ones he'd ignored for years. He was arrested on the spot. Not for me. Not for the scene. For the consequences he'd been dodging long before I ever met him. After that, everything went quiet. Weeks passed. My shoulder healed. Physical therapy. Hurt in a way that felt productive. I moved into a smaller apartment across town with an elevator and good lighting and no memories attached to it. I bought a reliable used car and named it Freedom because sometimes being obvious is part of healing. My job was patient. My friends were steady. I started sleeping through the night again. Evan disappeared from my life completely. According to his brother, he moved in, started paying rent, and finally took responsibility for himself. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need them. His mother invited me to lunch once. She apologized again, this time without excuses. She handed me an envelope with cash inside and told me it wasn't from her son. It was from her. I used it to furnish my new place. Nothing recycled. Nothing reclaimed. All new. Therapy helped me see the part one played in staying too long. How fixing him gave me purpose. How I mistook endurance for love. Letting go of that was harder than letting go of him. But it was also the most important part. If you've made it this far, you already know the lesson. Being loyal to the wrong person will cost you more than leaving ever will. If this story meant something to you, hit like. Subscribe if you believe people can reclaim their lives after being underestimated. Share this with someone who's still carrying a weight they don't have to. And tell me, what would you have done in my place? Where are you watching from? Have you ever seen someone implode because the safety net finally disappeared? I stood on my new balcony that night, the city humming below, my arm finally free, breathing air that felt like it belonged to me again.